virtual spaces in face-to-face classrooms. After teaching middle school and high school English for 4 years in Terre Haute, Indiana, Julie was driven by her interest in classroom writing practices, community, and engagement to joining the LCLE program here at Indiana University. While she was here, she's narrowed her interests a bit now to technology and new literacies, and the way that modes of meaning-making are shape pedagogical practices for teachers and learning processes for adolescents. So now in her 3rd year, she's hoping to complete her coursework in the fall. So let's give her a hand.
Everybody awake? The pre-afternoon slump, post-afternoon slump. All right.
You want the lights down a little bit?
For drama?
Thank you.
Yes. Very
There are
dramatic.
seats up here also, so as people come in, either you can direct people here.
I won't spit on them, I promise. Well, who am I is a question that we think about a lot as educators. We generally think of it in terms of things that our students are asking, right? Adolescents, middle schoolers, high schoolers, even our pre-service teachers. We think of them as dealing with those identity issues. But I feel as though those issues are also very true in practicing teachers experienced and very experienced teachers and teacher educators as well. So I was interested in looking at this idea of teacher identity and how negotiating a teacher identity in a virtual space may feel very differently than it does when you're negotiating a teacher identity in a face-to-face space. So it might be helpful to kind of start with a little bit about where I'm thinking in terms of what identity might mean. Wagner defines it as a process of becoming. So it's not something you kind of like possess or acquire at a certain stage and then can kind of leave. But it's something that's constantly evolving and becoming. It's an ongoing work that's pervasive. And there are ties, obviously, between your identity within yourself and then those roles that you enact as a teacher. And so I think that those two terms, roles and identities, are interestingly intertwined, although not synonymous. I think that identity also really kind of becomes reshaped and renegotiated through tension. And Deborah Britzman writes a lot about new teachers and their identity becoming teachers. She says, enacted in every pedagogy are the tensions between knowing and being, thought and action, theory and practice, knowledge and experience, the technical and the existential, the objective and the subjective. So my feeling is that as teachers kind of deal with those tensions, there is sort of this challenge and this need to kind of flexibly readjust the roles being enacted in the classroom as well as the identity that is internally and externally kind of posited. So in this research, I was primarily interested in looking at hybrid teachers, and this is becoming more and more popular, specifically in the secondary environment. Teachers that decide that for whatever reason, maybe the affordances that virtual spaces give, that they want to both use face-to-face classroom interactions in a traditional setting and some sort of virtual learning platform, whether that's a Moodle or a Ning. In the college setting, that might be on-course, but that's kind of the definition of hybrid. And I was interested in that specifically because that involves a lot of changes, right? The first hour of class, you might be a face-to-face teacher, and then you might say, okay, for a half an hour, jump on your laptops, and we're going to discuss the book online. And suddenly that teacher is shifting to kind of a virtual platform. And so I was interested in how that felt and what kind of tensions that created. So that was sort of my first question. I was interested in the objectives that teachers have in kind of pursuing this hybrid discussion model, and then what types of feedback or comments characterize their participation. And just to kind of narrow my study a bit, I just specifically looked at the participation on forum discussions. And so the focus of this entire study was simply on forum discussions in which teachers posed questions and students engaged in conversation virtually on these forum spaces. And then the teacher also participated in those forums to initiate extra questions, to address concerns, and that type of thing. Also, I was interested in what types of student participation result from teacher involvement. So what happened when the teacher entered the scene? And then also just practically, my research started very sort of theoretically about identity and how that feels. And it ended really practically because I was dealing with practicing teachers that were very practical and ready to have some advice. So what kind of best practice recommendations do teachers have for facilitating online discussion? I'm going to do just a really brief lit review. I have way too many slides, so I apologize for the kind of quick Flipping, we won't have time to read all of the text, which is fine. But I just was interested, first of all, is this even a question? I mean, is there a difference between kind of the face-to-face teacher and the virtual space teacher? And maybe the same rules apply, and maybe this research isn't relevant. But a lot of literature suggests otherwise. Dillenborg et al. Mentioned that there's sort of these new communication functionalities effective in virtual learning environments. And so, of course, the pedagogical challenge is to explore new ways of doing that. Zhu even goes so far as to say that you're putting on new hats as far as teaching is concerned in the blended learning environment. And that the computer-mediated communication discourse often even divests instructors of their teaching charisma and their years of face-to-face teaching skills. That was a pretty extreme statement, saying that not only are they different, but they can be opposite end of the spectrum different. And so that drove me to kind of pursue this interest. And we won't go through these. A lot has been written in terms of what kinds of roles shift in this kind of digital literacy focus when you're working on a platform. But here are some of the things that some of the literature has suggested, things like collaboration, interactivity, more public knowledge, transmission, from transmission to construction. So all these things are ways that the roles shift. I also looked into the teacher roles that literature has said happens on a virtual discussion platform, before discussion, during discussion, and after discussion. And I found a lot of common themes. Everyone had their own sort of like model to follow. But you can see from the before discussion, I have sort of 5 or 6 things generally that the literature agreed upon that teachers do. During discussion was by far the focus, and we won't go through these, but you can see these are just 6 different models. But they also had a lot of commonalities, things like you need to facilitate discourse as a teacher, you need to monitor participation, provide technical feedback, all those types of things, and nothing was too surprising. A lot of them emphasized different things. Something that was of interest to me that I want to pursue in future research is there was a huge dearth of information about the after discussion in a hybrid classroom. So you've done this forum discussion online, and it was sort of like end of story, great job, you did it. And there was sort of not a lot of discussion about the reflection or the follow-up, and so that's something I'd like to explore more. Okay, so to pull on for my research, you can see some of the theoretical frameworks that sort of guided me, social constructivism, dealing with how students and teachers kind of help to construct meaning. Community of learners, practice and inquiry aren't synonymous terms, but they all have kind of different pieces of a pie. Levenwinger described communities of practice as having an emphasis on the relational character of knowledge and learning and the concerned nature of learning activity for the people involved. That was helpful for me in terms of evaluating student and teacher participation and discussing these issues on the online forums. And then, of course, the new literacies approach guided how I looked at the data and how I thought about virtual realities in classroom settings. So the way I kind of got into the schools and got to meet some teachers involved the Participatory Assessment Network. This is a group of learning science folks led by Dr. Hickey over in Learning Sciences, and they had gotten a large technology grant, and they work with several teachers within the area in Monroe and also outside of Monroe. And with this grant, they not only paid for like one-to-one laptops for students, but they also paid for professional development opportunities maybe every month in which the teachers met together, not to kind of like here's something you should do and then use it, but actually to have time to collaborate. So during that time, there was some really rich discussion and some rich collaborations between schools. So I enjoyed going to those meetings a lot. So with that, I talked